absolutely delighted to welcome you to tonight's program with visiting artist Wain Valentine. And first, Tom Lerner.
Good evening, everybody. As some of you may know, a major art event took place in Southern California about a year ago. Called Pacific Standard Time, the event's most apparent undertaking was approximately 50, that's 50, exhibitions across the region that ran at the same time and collectively focused on the extraordinarily rich and diverse art coming out of Los Angeles in the period immediately after World War II and running up to 1980. As you can probably hear, I'm neither from Colorado or California. The Getty Conservation Institute, the GCI, where I work, is dedicated to advancing the conservation practice of cultural heritage. And one of our current and main areas of interest is the conservation needs and requirements of contemporary art. And we really wanted in on this Pacific Standard Time event. After all, many of the artists active in Los Angeles at this time turned to a whole range of new materials, many of them coming from local industries, ranging from aerospace to surfboard. And all new materials require new research and new thinking when it comes to their conservation. But in our research, one artist stood out, perhaps there's no surprise I'm about to say, Wain Valentine, who had not only found and used a new material, he actually had to invent one, a polyester resin that would allow him to create his wonderful, large, highly polished, and beautiful sculptures. We told this story by exhibiting Grey Column, one of the largest pieces he made in this material, which is not here this evening. It actually would not fit into the gallery space. But three of the maquettes that we used, the smaller versions, to create this work are here. There are so many things we could speak about. I know you so well. I've never been here with you. It's so fascinating to sort of relive some of this with you. And even though polyester wasn't the only material you use in your art, when we go to the exhibition, there's a whole room dedicated to it. And it all happened here, didn't it? The sort of discovery with plastics and understanding this amazing material that you went on to use. So tell us how it all happened.
It was being at the right place at the right time. And after the war was over in 1945, my parents moved back here and bought a house. And the school system and junior high at Lincoln Junior High, I took a metal shop because I always liked to make things with my hands, model airplanes, model boats, whatever. And my shop teacher introduced me to a material that was like opening a door for me. My mother's family were from up in Empire, Colorado, above Golden, above Idaho Springs. And my great-grandfather moved here from Copenhagen to prospect for gold. So as a kid, I grew up with my uncles up there on the tailing piles, and they'd pick up a stone and spit on it and say, "Dwayne, look at this, isn't it beautiful?" And I became so captivated with those stones. At one point, I started with a little guy in Lander, Wyoming, where my dad was working on a job, who had a curio shop and a lapidary shop. And Lander is a capital kind of agates and jade and a few semi-precious stones, a few beryls and things, emeralds, and I started watching him, I should say, cutting and polishing these stones. And I was picking up these transparent moss agates out in the flats and watched the inside of them and that transparency come to life when they were polished. And Mr. Warner at Lincoln Junior High in the metal shop said, "Dwayne, look at this stuff. It's just been released by the Air Force, and the scraps were given to the school systems. It was plexiglass." He said, "This is a lot easier than polishing stone." And that started me my interest in these kinds of materials. And the next year in junior high shop, Mr. Perry Knight introduced me to polyester resin because they were making PT boats someplace out here and using fiberglass and polyester. And he said, you mix a little bit of this and a little bit of that, a little bit of your own color, you make your own stones. And so it started all this madness as a kid, which continued through my development in art. And I took it to college and everybody poo-pooed it, and I had to do it in the backyard, which was fine. And the same after I was at the University of Colorado. And again, I did it in the backyard. But it's something that grabbed me, and I've hung on to mainly because of my interest. It started out interested in collecting rocks and stones, and it was like finding treasure for me.
And then you moved to LA in '65, right?
LA to
So
65.
why did you move? What was the pull
Well,
there?
as an artist, Tom, I had 3 boys and very little money. And so it was a choice as an artist. I figured move to New York or move to Los Angeles. And I was fortunate enough to get a part-time teaching job at UCLA teaching art students how to use plastics. So with a very low salary, I built a 8-foot by 8-foot by 20-foot trailer, and like a bunch of the Jodes, piled everything into the trailer and pulled it with my pickup, and the kids were in the station wagon, and the St. Bernard was in the back of the pickup, and the 5 of us drove from Boulder to Venice, California. And I wanted to go to Venice because that's where the artists were. And I had no idea really what I was getting into, how wonderful it might be, because as a kid I'd always had a love affair with these mountains and the sky and the clouds and being in Colorado. And when I moved out west, it started a love affair with the sea and that murky sky that existed in Los Angeles at that time.
And we saw in the movie, and we'll see in the exhibition, that it wasn't just polyester you were working with and perspex and other plastics, but polyester became the one that really grabbed you, I think. And so, talk us a little bit about this, the limitations you found with not being able to cast in large volumes.
The part of the reason that I became interested in the polyester is that the perspex, which is the English name for plexiglass, acrylic, is very difficult to work with. It has to be worked with an autoclave, which was expense-wise prohibitive to me. But the polyester, I could mix it up and pour it in a mold and develop something by myself, whereas the acrylic was generally too expensive for me to work with. And it ended up being polyester.
And then this amazing story where even a professor from Caltech saying you were an artist even in the science, so you're actually creating a new material, modifying this resin to allow you to do what you wanted to do. That's not a usual artistic thing, is it?
Well, I think artists always find a way to do what's in their head. And these pieces were in my mind, and I kept wanting to do larger and larger pieces. And I was fortunate enough to meet a salesman for Pittsburgh Plate Glass Resins Division who made polyester resin in Los Angeles, Ed Reve. And Ed, who knows why a salesman from a paint company would become interested in what an artist was doing, but I was fortunate enough that he did. And he helped me develop this plastic with Pittsburgh to cast in large castings. And we worked on it for several years, started with him in '67. I was working with polyester and fiberglass, in 65 and 66 because the material had not been developed to cast in large forms, but I could make large forms by making fiberglass reinforced polyester. So I made some small molds for the big pieces, which I wanted to do transparent and would have done in acrylic because I was very influenced by Craig Kaufman's work in Los Angeles, and he was one of the artists whose work I was interested in and that led me to California. And also what led me to California was I saw some artist work. My teacher and sponsor in graduate school at the University of Colorado and I took a trip on the train from Denver to New York City, very grueling. But there was a stopover in Chicago, and they had the American annual at the Art Institute. And there I saw the work of the artists from Los Angeles, and I thought, I can identify with these guys more than I can identify with the New York artists, because they were working with these new materials that people in New York were still laughing about when I went to the galleries. So it was a very nice fit. And the people did finally become interested in what I was doing. My second dealer in Los Angeles was Ace and Doug Christmas and Jennifer Kellen. I think Jennifer came today. Thanks, Jennifer. If you're here, wave at me. Douglas had a last-minute client that came in from Beijing and had to stay in Los Angeles. But it was one of the few galleries that accepted what I did in contemporary art, and I've been showing with them since 1966.
And one of the things I've always found, well, many things I find fascinating about you, but most of that's quite personal. But I think in a lot of contemporary artists, there's quite monumental things get conceived and thought about, and they're shipped off to a fabricator, and they're made. But you were doing all of this stuff. I mean, you were these big pieces. You were doing it all, and I think we touched on some of the danger involved in the movie with the resin cracking and creaking. But I mean, things often nearly went wrong or did go wrong. So
things often did go wrong.
Tell us about some of that.
The first very large piece I cast, which was about a ton, it wasn't mixed properly, and it got too hot, and it started to smoke. I was certain it was going to catch on fire, because in the chemical process, there are two components: a cobalt that is mixed previously in the plastic, and to that one adds a catalyst of methyl ethyl ketone peroxide, a long word, but and there's a spontaneous chain reaction between the two chemicals that creates a heat, an exothermic heat within the plastic itself. And if you were to mix the two materials together, the cobalt and the MEKP, it would spontaneously explode. But it's metered out in such a way, gram by gram, that it heats over a very long time. So as part of the process, I had to learn how much to mix with what size quantity so that it didn't get too hot, didn't catch on fire. If it got too hot, it also cracked apart. And this particular piece, by the time I was, my helpers had gone from the studio, I took the forklift and pushed it up to the back door, and I had a big 10 by 10 foot like garage door, and I had it sitting there all night with the forklift in back of it getting ready to push it out when it caught on fire. It didn't catch on fire, but it smoked and smelled like high heavens for hours.
I should just mention we'll throw it open for questions in just a couple of minutes, so please do think about that. But do you ever get dog hair in your resins? That big St. Bernard, was that there getting in the way, or you kept the dog well away from the studio?
No, the Saint Bernard was well away. When I had my studio in Boulder, my cat helped me paint a lot with my paintings.
Right, yeah.
But no, the Saint Bernard was always outside in Colorado and in California.
And there was also the very large piece that's now in the Norton Simon Museum collection, about the same size as Grey Column, where there was almost a complete disaster, right?
Yeah, Tom's right. It was almost a complete disaster. It was the biggest piece I had poured to date. It was 5,000 pounds, and that's a lot of liquid. That's 10 55-gallon drums. And I constructed the mold out of composition board, pressed wood, and 2x4s, which I thought was very strong, until I got the ninth barrel poured in, and the 2x4s started cracking, and the mold started splitting. And in a panic, there was a knock at the back door, and I opened the door, and Larry Bell, an artist friend of mine who's next door, came over, and he had 3 friends with him. And he said, you know, I just happen to have these 6 really big pieces of timber in my studio. Let's go get them and see if we can clamp this back together. So between Larry and his 3 guys and an assistant of mine and myself, we put big pipe clamps and ran these giant, like 6x12s down each side of the mold and clamped it back together. But there's a curing time, whereas all the liquid must be poured into the mold to allow the bubbles time to get out. Well, that last corner of that piece, which is 8 by 8 feet, up in the top of one corner there are about 6 or 7 bubbles. But other than that, I managed to get all the bubbles out of these big pieces just by letting it rise naturally. It can be vacuumed to get the air out, but I never had any facility to do pieces that large in a vacuum chamber.
We have a time for just a couple of questions. I can't see very much, but if you do want to ask a question, maybe a hand could go up. There is a roving microphone somewhere. Actually, there's a question right down here at the front. We'll take this one, and then we'll take one over here. The microphone at the front, please.
Do you have the mic, Keith?
Where's the mic?
I'm a singer, I can probably project.
Very well, we can hear you. Go. Stand up, if you will. So.
In the video, there was a scene of you walking along the beach and looking out at a sail in the water. And I was simply curious, I saw a lot of cubes in in the places where they were displaying the pieces. I saw the column and I saw spheres, but I was wondering if you ever made a piece that was inspired by that sail that you saw.
I made pieces that were inspired by sailboats here in Fort Collins, but not when I got to California. I did a lot of pieces about the sea and the sky, and there are 2 paintings in the exhibition next door that started by wanting to float objects, colors, or forms over the ocean, over the horizon. And I made a series of works for years which either had a painted figure above the horizon or a collaged figure above the horizon. And I wanted that sensation of something floating. And I had a dream one night, and I awakened. And instead of gluing something on top of the surface, I cut the surface away, and to my complete delight and surprise, the surface seemed to float out in front of the painting. I know I'm going to prejudice your viewing, but it seems to float out more than when I pasted something on the surface. The first real art critic that looked at them, I was invited to do an exhibition in the town I live in now, Torrance, California. They'd built a new museum, and I was invited to do the opening exhibition. And when the curator came over to look at my new paintings, she thought that I had a line glued on them. And she kept walking closer and closer and closer, and I said, Christina, it's all right, you can touch it. And she reached out to touch the line, and she went, oh! Because her finger went right, you'll see the opening in the exhibition, it went right into instead of out. No, a long answer to a simple question.
But no sail shapes. There was a question up here.
Yes, I just want to first welcome you home, Lampkin, and that's the mascot.
Frank Lampkin was the guy the field was named after.
Oh.
I grew up in San Diego and LA, and the mic is just wonderful.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, you obviously in your earlier photos of you in your studio looked like I did growing up in the 60s in San Diego. And I want to know, did you ever, I used to make my own boards. And I think you might have surfed.
Absolutely.
And do you have photos of any of your boards? They must have been extraordinary, because I mean, I used to shape and glass and do all that stuff, but your boards must have been some of the more exceptional surfboards to ever see the water.
I only made one surfboard. I've got the batch of them, but I only made one.
You have
And
a batch of them?
it was not made for surfacing, for surfing, rather.
Yeah.
It was a double pintail that came to a pintail on each end, and it was black.
A swallowtail.
It was black lacquer, polished, buffed, with a black acrylic line on it. And that's now property of my wife's, Kiana. I only made one
Do you have
surfboard.
photos of those? If I left my, I mean, I just would love to see one. And I also have one of the only longboards, I think, in northern Colorado that's never had wax on it. If you have time, I know you have so much time. If you'd like to come over and see it, it's beautiful
Thursday,
glass. But anyway, just thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's very hard to see at the back, so if you have there's right, one up here. We've got two questions up here. Yes, if you could take the mic up, it really does help to hear.
Yes, I was curious about your chemical work with Hastings, and I was wondering if you have a patent on that process or material.
Could you say that again, louder?
Do you have a patent on the material that you worked on with Hastings?
No, I don't have a patent. I should have. And I was had been teaching at the University of Colorado and was teaching at UCLA, and I did publish all my findings, which I really never got anything from. I was supposed to get a royalty, but I did for a while, and then it kind of, I probably have a big royalty check coming sometime that I'll never get. But I did not patent it because I believed that the only value of knowledge was dispersing it. So it was to give away. So it's really, this is homecoming for me, which is really fun. Driving by all the old places. I still haven't shown my wife the first place I parked with my girlfriend. We were on horseback. And it was while they were building Horsetooth Reservoir, and we were up there with my dad and some other people riding our horses, and I just shooed Dad away, which he was always very happy with, and sat on the rocks and watched the bulldozers and the graders and the utes work the dirt and the stone down below. So it's really fun to be here. We haven't driven by my granny's house yet, but Mrs. Frickman ensures me it's still there. So I drove by my old residence in Boulder. I had a residence in Boulder, which was an old grocery store with an apartment behind, and I used the grocery store in front for my painting studio and the garage in the back for my sculpture studio. And now they've built 3 giant houses on that one lot, which Nobody thought lots were very big then, but it's certainly loaded up with houses now. And so is Fort Collins. When I was a kid, there was almost nothing between Loveland and here but barns and houses. And holy smokes, it's really unrecognizable.
Well, we are bang on time. In fact, 1 minute over, so I think we've done perfectly. So we're all going to get into the exhibition now, but please thank Wain Valentine.